With me today is Chester Santos, also known as the International Man of Memory. Chester is a US memory champion and best-selling author and is widely regarded to be the world's leading memory expert. Chester has appeared on CNN, ABC, PBS, NBC, CBS, BBX, BBC, and the Science Channel, as well as in print media such as the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, San Francisco Chronicle, Washington Post, and Time magazine. The 2020 documentary film David Vs Goliath features Chester and his memory training skills. Welcome, Chester, and thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Christy. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
So, Chester, you have educated executives for CEO Clubs International and YPO, investment professionals for NASDAQ and Credit Suisse, students for organizations at Berkeley, Stanford, and Harvard, actors at the Screen Actors Guild Foundation, professional athletes, politicians. You've given TEDx talks, and you've even been invited by Google to present to their employees. And here you are chatting to me. So thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Now, in this podcast, I chat with interesting people from around the world about their career and life experiences, and every guest teaches me something, and I'm hoping to get a few inside tips from you today that myself and the listeners can use to improve our memories. But before we get to that, I really want to know your story. I want to know the story behind Chester before you became the US memory champion. So can you take me back a little bit? I believe you've got a Bachelor of Psychology. So I'm keen to know if this has always been sort of an area of interest for you.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time in school. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology. I have a master's degree in software engineering. I also went to law school for a couple of years as well. My first career when I did exit the academic world was working as a software engineer in the Silicon Valley area. I, at the time, was just flipping channels one night, and I happened to catch a segment on ABC's 2020. It's a popular evening news show here in the US. They had a segment on the United States Memory Championship, and it just caught my interest because I would often just randomly get the comment from people. People would say, wow, you have a really good memory. And with those comments kind of in the back of my mind, when I saw that segment on TV, I thought, well, hey, people say I have a good memory. Maybe I can do well in this United States memory competition. But when I looked into what the best people in the country were scoring in the various events, memorizing decks of playing cards, hundreds of digits, hundreds of names in just a matter of minutes, I quickly found out that although I may have been, probably above average to begin with in terms of memory, I was nowhere near that level. So that's when I started doing research into, okay, how can I magnify my memory from where it's currently at? Based on that research, I started to focus in on a small subset of techniques that I found worked best for me personally, trained myself in that subset until eventually I did manage to win the United States Memory Championship. And since then, I've spent the last 12 plus years training other people around the world in the techniques that I feel can most benefit them right away in their career, personal life, and also to help out maybe their kids or grandkids in school.
So look, I be honest, I didn't actually know that, these memory championships were actually a thing. And, we sort of pulled this interview together within, less than sort of 48 hours. So I quickly did a little bit of research, and I actually found on Netflix that there's a show on there that they actually follow 4 memory masters through a competition. So it's a big thing. But how did you get into it? So obviously you watched it, you saw 2020, but how do you actually go about being registered and qualifying and going through that? Because I imagine there'd be a lot of people that want to sort of participate.
Yeah, so I mean, that process isn't difficult at all. I mean, you just go to the website and register, basically. The part that's difficult is actually doing well in the competition. So in the United States Memory Championship, so the documentary that you saw, I know all of those people, of course. It follows them not only in competing in their their national competitions, but as well as competing internationally. So there are different levels of competition, but in the United States Memory Championship, the amount of competitors varies from year to year, but the top scores are always very difficult, no matter what the number of competitors is. So, for instance, if you're not able to memorize a deck of cards in 5 minutes or less, the 52 card shuffle deck, you probably wouldn't even enter into the United States Memory Championship. That's kind of a bare minimum score. And from there, as you go higher up in the ranks, so, someone that comes in 20th in the competition versus 10th versus the top 5, top 3, it just becomes more and more intense. So the hard part is not registering and competing. The hard part is if you want to do well and, make it into like the top 5 or something. So when I competed, for instance, I think this will explain what I'm talking about a bit better. So when I competed, I was memorizing a deck of cards in less than 90 seconds, so less than a minute and a half, and that was one of the very top scores in that event at the time. But nowadays, there are people that can do it in less than even 30 seconds. And there are 52 cards in the deck, right? And the scores keep on getting better and better. So that's really the hard part, I think, is doing well and staying near the top of the best in the world. They treat it like a mental Olympics. So just like, as far as the fastest time in track and field for running around the track, it gets better and better, right? As time goes on, you just push those limits. The same goes for the brain and for memory.
So I was going to ask you, so do you sort of think it's similar to sort of training muscles and that sort of thing? And do you find that people that don't have a good memory are sort of just maybe perhaps a little bit lazy in that aspect of their life? Like, can anybody sort of have these skills, or do you sort of have to be born with a little bit of specialness in you to start with?
Yeah, so definitely your brain and your memory, so the brain in general and memory specifically, can be trained with just the right techniques and a little bit of training and practice. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize. They don't know, right? So if only you knew this, that you could, if only you knew that you really could improve your memory, I think many more people out there would work on it. But unfortunately, a lot of us out there think that you're just born either good in this area or bad in this area, and you can't really do anything about it. But really, it's just the right approach. The training and the practice can be fun, and I think people will be amazed at what is possible if they'll just put in a little bit of time working on their memory.
So what would be one of the things that you would suggest to people to start to improve those skills?
Yeah, so there are a lot of different things you can do just on a weekly basis. It doesn't take much time. I mean, even 15 to 20 minutes dedicated in 1 week will go a long way as long as you're consistent. I would recommend trying to memorize the phone numbers at a minimum of friends and family members that you call all the time. So we all used to be able to do that, right? But nowadays, you give somebody even one phone number and they feel paralyzed. They cannot commit that to memory, right? Yet growing up, I was able to, I knew everybody's phone number. My parents would give me emergency numbers that they thought were important for me to know. We could all do that, but it's getting so bad nowadays that you have so many people out there that don't even know their own phone number because we've become so digitally dependent, right? We're dependent on these devices to remember everything for us. So that's one thing. Just I still enter numbers into my phone, but I also commit them to memory. And when I need to call someone, I first rely on my memory. If my memory happens to be failing me at that particular moment for whatever reason, I will then go to the auto dial in the address book. But this just provides you with an easy way to exercise your memory really on a daily basis when you're calling people, if you will put forth that effort to memorize the numbers of friends and family members, maybe colleagues that you call a lot. Another thing, maybe some famous quotes that you find interesting, right? This will exercise your brain, exercise your memory. Also, it'll make you a little bit more interesting, maybe at parties, definitely in conversation. If you can bring up, oh, according to Socrates, this, bring up some famous quotes. So those are some things that I think would be pretty easy to do, but you need to make it much easier to commit anything to memory. You need to learn these techniques that memory champions like myself use. And there will always be three main principles involved, no matter the information type and no matter what type of technique you end up implementing in the end. Principle number one is visualization. So turn whatever it is that you want to remember in some way into something that's easy for you to picture or visualize in your mind. So if we were talking about names, if I'm meeting someone named Mike, I might picture a microphone because that would remind me of the name Mike. If I'm meeting a woman named Alice, I might picture a white rabbit because that might remind me of Alice in Wonderland, right? So that's what I mean by coming up with visuals. That's how I open at conferences and corporate events around the world. A lot of times I will open with naming hundreds of people in the audience after just meeting everyone before it starts. It's by turning those names into powerful visuals. I can get into names in more detail if you have any interest in discussing that. But really what I wanted to bring up there was the power of visuals. Let's say you, Christy, went to a party. All right. You met a lot of new people. 2 weeks after the party's over, you're talking with one of your friends that was there with you at the party, and your friend describes someone to you. Your friend says, "Hey, Christy, do you remember that attorney that we met at the party a couple weeks ago? He's a member of the local tennis club." As your friend is going through the description of this attorney, a lot of times you can picture who they're describing, right? Obviously, your friend can picture who they're describing to you, but a lot of times neither one of you can manage to remember the person's name, right? So that example there illustrates, I think, pretty clearly that when it comes to dealing with people, a lot of times we're at least pretty good at remembering faces, but we're not nearly as good at remembering names. And when you really think about it, it makes sense because when you're interacting with people in various ways, you see their face, right? Their face is recorded into your visual memory, but at no point do you see the name. The name is something much more abstract to the brain. So that's why it's very effective to turn the name into a visual. So I use names there to better illustrate that main principle, but one is visualization. Principle number two will be, from there, try to involve as many more senses as you can. So in addition to maybe seeing the white rabbit, you can smell the rabbit. Maybe you feel the rabbit's fur. It feels very soft, right? As you add more senses, you will be activating more and more areas of your brain, and you'll be building more and more connections in your mind to the information, making it so much easier to retrieve it later on. So I start at one point. We have a show in the United States called PBS's Nova Science. It's the longest running science show that we have over here. And I started an episode called How Smart Can We Get? Or maybe people can just Google Chester Santos, that's me, and PBS, and probably the clip would come up. You should be able to watch it for free somewhere online. If people check it out, they'll see me performing what might at first look like crazy memory feats. And then I trained David Pogue. He's a news guy for the New York Times and also CBS News. I trained him. He was then able to perform some pretty cool memory feats. After that, they had some brain scientists, neuroscientists come on and explain for people watching, at home, okay, how did Chester do that? How did David Pogue do it with just a little training? And these brain scientists confirmed that it's because with these memory techniques that I've mastered over the years and that people listening to the interview today can also experiment with and put into practice later on. What's happening is we end up recruiting extra areas of the brain. So areas of the brain that most people don't involve at all when trying to commit things to memory. With these techniques, we recruit more of the brain to help, so it becomes easy to remember. And part of that is learning to use more senses in order to activate your brain. So that's the second simple principle. And then the final thing, third principle to keep in mind, is simply while you are seeing and experiencing these things in your mind that remind you of the information, try to make it all crazy, unusual, extraordinary in some way, so that you can take advantage of the psychological aspect to human memory. And that is, all of us, with putting forth little to no effort at all, we tend to remember things that catch us by surprise, right? That are strange, unusual in some way. If Christy and your studio area, if this actually happened right now at this moment, if it really happened, an elephant just crashed into that area that you're in and started to spray water all over you with its trunk, and wherever people are listening to or watching this interview, if an elephant crashed into the room that they're in, I'm sure that you would remember that for the rest of your life and always tell that story. You're never going to believe this. I was watching this interview with this memory guy, and as I was watching it, an elephant just crashed into my room. It was the craziest thing. Even 30, 40 years from now, you might be telling that story without putting forth any effort at all to commit it to memory, right? Now, to this day, scientists still don't understand how that works in the brain. How is it that sometimes in just one instant, something will go straight into long-term memory and stay there forever, whereas other times we have so much difficulty committing things to memory, names to get more out of business networking, presentations, important facts and figures to better demonstrate our expertise, training, exam material. Sometimes we spend weeks, months on it, and we can't get it into long-term memory, right? Although this might not be fully understood, just realizing that there is this aspect to human memory, how the mind works, we can take advantage of it and apply it to useful things, right? And when you combine those three principles that I just went over, visualization, utilizing additional senses from there, and also making it all crazy, unusual, extraordinary, instantly it becomes easier to remember really just about anything at all. And you'll really be amazed at what you're able to pull off in terms of memory and how this will give you an advantage in your professional and personal development.
Yeah, I'm one of those people that, I meet a lot of people and I find it really difficult to remember their names. And, in my day-to-day job, I'm in quite a male-dominated industry, and sometimes I can be sort of the only female in the room. So I find that everybody can remember my name, but I can't remember theirs. And you feel really, really rude. But I've seen you walk into a room and you've looked at hundreds of people, you've shaken their hand, you've asked them their name, they've told you their name, you've repeated it back to them, and then you will stand there and recall all of their names, and I'm talking hundreds of them. So with regards to visualization, and I saw a couple, they had the same name. So how did you differentiate those people and those names when you're talking about so many?
Yeah, so I described a little so far the visual concept, right, with the microphone for Mike or the white rabbit for Alice. There is an additional step necessary that makes this work even with hundreds of people, and that is, and even if some of them have the same name, what you want to do is connect that image to something that is unique to you about the person's look. So if I'm meeting one Mike, and to me, when I ask myself what's unique to me about his look, I think he has kind of cool looking hair. I will focus in on that and I will imagine the hair interacting with the microphone. Okay. So what happens is when I'm going around and I need to rename these hundreds of people in the audience, right? After having gone around and met them before the presentation starts, all I do is ask myself, okay, what did I notice about their look? What I noticed in the first place is very likely what I'm going to notice again. So I'll see the hair again, and then the microphone would come back to me, reminding me that the name's Mike. Now, if it's a different Mike, I might notice something different about his look. maybe the other mic has, bigger than average ears. So I might imagine a microphone coming out of his ears or something like that, or I might use a different image for, instead of a microphone, I might use something else for a different mic. But that's basically the concept. So just ask yourself, what did you notice about the person before? You're likely to notice the same thing, and the image that you stored there will come back to you. So it sounds maybe a little bit silly, but it's incredibly powerful and effective. Anyone can become really good at doing it with a little bit of practice, and that's how I name hundreds of people at these presentations around the world.
I was thinking when I was watching a couple of the clips, have you ever not remembered somebody's name, and then do they feel that they're a little bit forgettable in that respect if you don't remember?
It has happened. So, for instance, when I did this this TEDx talk I did, I went for 115 names, and I made 3 mistakes. So I ended up getting 112 out of 115. So I do make mistakes on occasion. And there are a lot of positives to being a memory champion, but you did describe one of the negatives. So it has happened, for instance, where out of, I remember I had one audience with like 200 people and I missed one, and that one person was kind of traumatized. They came up to me afterwards and said, "Was I so unmemorable? Like, what is it? What is it about me?" But I mean, it has happened, but it's rare. And for most people, I think in terms of your business situations and personal development, you're only going to experience positives, only experience benefits from working on this skill. It's only because I'm a memory champion that I have, there's more of a negative effect if I happen to forget one person's name.
Yeah, definitely. I think people would probably be a little bit self-conscious if you did forget their name. They'd be like, I'm a little bit forgettable. But sometimes that's not a bad thing. But I did want to just touch on, you mentioned before that the memory champions are getting quicker in the things that they can recall. And, obviously each year things are getting better, similar to, sort of the Olympics and running and swimming and things like that. So do you find that you're still learning off those people? Like, do you still continue to learn, or do you, I suppose, practice daily your own your own things that you've learned over the years, or do you continually seek out additional learning?
Yeah, so really I've spent now, again, 12 plus years training other people around the world in these techniques and how these types of techniques can benefit them in their career and personal life. Right now, in terms of my own training, it's on the job. So when I give these presentations, I will open, with naming everyone in the audience, or at least, if there's 1,000 people in the audience, I try to go for like 200 or so. So in that way, I'm practicing on a weekly basis, and also depending on the organization. So sometimes if it's financial services, I'll also do a demonstration with numbers. So people from the audience will call out numbers. Those will go on to a screen behind me, and I'll try to recite those then from memory, for both forwards and backwards. So just on the job giving presentations, I'm keeping my memory skills sharp. And then also just in my personal life. So memorizing confirmation numbers, all of my credit card numbers, things like that. I find it quite useful in many just random situations. For instance, pre-COVID anyway, I was traveling a lot, obviously, for these presentations, and it always amused me when visiting a new country and you have to fill out the landing cards, seeing people scrambling to look for their passport and their luggage, to fill out those cards. But of course, I have all of the information memorized, so I can very quickly do it. Checking in for hotels, a lot of times they'll ask for the confirmation number. You'll see people that don't have an internet connection at that moment because they're in another country, so they don't have their data and they're not yet connected to the hotel's Wi-Fi, so they're scrambling. They don't know where their confirmation number is, and then the whole process just takes a lot longer. But I just right away, oh, here it is from memory. There are just a lot of random situations in everyday life in which I feel like it's sort of like a superpower that I have. It can be very useful in many different
Absolutely.
ways.
I definitely think it's a superpower. And, it's funny, you said earlier that we remember certain things and certain things stay in our long-term memory. And, I used to be able to recall my credit card number off by heart, but didn't know my son's phone number, which is a little bit concerning when you think about it like that. So I think we all need to probably spend a little bit more time training our brains. But what I love about what you've done, Chester, is you won that competition back in 2008, but you've really taken that opportunity and you've been able to build a skill, build a business, I suppose, around that. And you've traveled the world. I think you've been to over 30 countries, and you're able to then help other people to be able to improve their memories. So how were you able to turn that opportunity into such a long-term business?
Really just getting started and perseverance. It isn't something, it isn't easy, definitely, to build a business from scratch, but step one, get started, right? So you don't have to, a quote that I like is, you don't have to be great to get started, but you do have to start to eventually become great at something, right? So that applies to personal, professional development, but also applies to starting a business. So just, I just got started and slowly built my resume up. So, in the beginning, doing things in terms of speaking fee, maybe for a lower cost, or even in other cases, no fee at all. Just maybe travel expenses. For instance, for Harvard University, I did that speaking engagement for just only travel expenses covered, but so that I could build up that resume. I've been a speaker at Harvard University. I've done, all of these different things, Google, and, so just building up over the years the resume. And of course, as I've been teaching this to people for 12 plus years, building my own really expertise in how best to get these concepts across to people and how to best help them perform better in their career and personal life. So it's just been getting started and being consistent and persevering over time.
Yeah, I think it's amazing because obviously this is a competition that runs every year, but your name is one of the ones that really stands out. You're the go-to person for, memory teaching, I suppose. If somebody wants to learn how to improve their memory, you're the person they go to. And I think that's an amazing feat in itself, to be able to differentiate yourself from other people that, have the same sort of skill, but you've been able to really take it to that sort of next level. And you've been on a lot of media and everything, and you're also a best-selling author. So can you tell us a little bit about those two books? I'm hoping I've got it right with two, that you've authored, and how they came about and why you wanted to write those.
Yeah. So, I do have two books: Instant Memory Training for Success and Mastering Memory Techniques to Turn Your Brain from a Sieve to a Sponge. That is, again, a matter of, perseverance, I guess, over time, in terms of being able to get a book deal from a major New York City publisher. That was just a goal of mine. I mean, I know there are a lot of experts, authors out there that just self-publish and say, I'm the author of like 20 books or something like that. But when I read their book, it's, there's grammatical errors, or it doesn't really make too much sense in terms of the logical flow and things, because it's just a self-published book that they threw together. I really had a personal goal. I'm not saying everyone needs to do this, in my field, but I personally just had a goal that I wanted a major New York City publisher to handle my book project. And I got rejected for many years trying to get those book deals. But as I built up that resume that I was talking about earlier, then I got, big offers where they would not only give me the book deal, but pay me a lot of money to write the book. But that was just perseverance again, just kept on trying, writing, and every year building up that resume until I did become known as the go-to expert in this field, memory skills. So these publishers saw me as the guy to give the book deals to. The first book was published in the UK. It was really focused more towards business professionals. The title actually changed from, at one point it was supposed to be Instant Memory Training for Business Success, and the content of the book is has that focus in mind, but it later we dropped off the business just to appeal to a wider audience. It did really well in the UK. It was a bestseller in the W.H. Smith stores. In the UK, you would see it right next to the Harry Potter books, actually. And that helped me to get subsequently a second book deal for the Mastering Memory book, which is published by Sterling. And then that one is really more geared towards a general audience. So that one would be useful for everybody, business, people, students, and so on.
And so you also run memory workshops.
Yeah, so I do memory workshops. Well, I am based in San Francisco, California. So again, a lot of things I'll be talking about are pre-COVID. So pre-COVID, I was doing a monthly workshop in San Francisco. So one Saturday per month, and just anyone could buy tickets and attend that. I would teach the workshop myself live and in person, and also basically the equivalent as a corporate workshop all over the world. And now I've taken it, a step further to reach even more people online. So the equivalent of that first workshop is memoryschool.net. So I've created an online memory school. I would picture a giant fishing net so that people can remember that it's memoryschool.net. And that's basically the equivalent of my San Francisco workshop is the core training. Then there's an advanced training program. And for that one, I also upload new videos every month. So there's ongoing training every single month. So that's the option for basically an online workshop, online interactive training through the Memory School. I set up code for your listeners only is the code. So remember that if you're listening to this, code only. I set it for 25 uses. I don't know how many people listening to this will end up being interested, but it should work at least for the first 25 people to use it. It should set the enrollment fee down to $0 instead of usually it would be $200 for the enrollment fee. So that's another way to learn and develop these types of memory skills.
That's amazing. And thank you very much for that. And I hope the listeners of If Only You Knew podcast will take that opportunity up, because I think, obviously COVID would have, created a lot of challenges for you, because being in the same room as people is something, quite special with the gift that you do have. But being able to do things online, obviously you're able to reach more people. And I think being able to connect more personally with people around the world is, it's a really great thing. So have you changed up the way that you do things because you're doing it online?
Yeah. So what happened was, what has happened is I basically took the content from the San Francisco workshop, and it's going to be the same content, but me via video instead of live and in person. But it will be, basically the same instruction. You'll see me there, and I will guide you through fun and interactive exercises. And then I added even more content that I wouldn't, because you have limited, I guess, in terms of the amount of time people can commit to being there in person. So I figured that one day was long enough, I guess, for people to commit to in terms of a live workshop. But for the online, I was able to add a lot more content because you can go through it at your own pace. So maybe, over the course of a couple of months, you want to try to get through the core training. Then you can spend the next month or couple of months going through the advanced training. And so there is that advantage, I guess, as I was able to include more content, and people can go through it at their own pace and review the videos as many times as they want, whereas it's a little bit more restrictive, I guess, if it's just a live one-day workshop.
And I think, sometimes people do need to be able to go back and listen to things a few times. And just before we went live to record earlier, we were just talking about doing a little bit of an exercise, and I was like, no, I don't want to do it. But you're going to go through and teach us a few things about how we can improve our memory. So do you mind doing that now for us, Chester?
Yeah, I would love to guide people through this exercise. So it'll just give you, I think, a better idea of how you can implement those three main principles that I talked about. So visualization, utilizing additional senses from there, and using your creativity and imagination to make everything that you're experiencing in your mind crazy, unusual, extraordinary. We're going to keep that all in mind and try to commit to memory the following random list of words. So it's going to be monkey, iron, rope, kite, house, paper, shoe, worm, envelope, pencil, river, rock, tree, cheese, and dollar. So that's the random list of words. Now, when I recite that list of words and I have live audiences, at this point, I can see people looking at me as if I'm crazy. Like, there's just no way I'm going to be able to remember that, not unless, they're given a lot of time to do it. That's what people think. And also, if people attempt that, usually they would just write the words out over and over again. They would recite it over and over again, read it over and over. So just rote memory, right? But that isn't very effective, and it's a boring way to go about things. So instead, I'm going to guide you through a more effective and more fun approach. I'm going to guide you through a little story. So I want for people just to visualize what I describe. Okay, so just relax, have fun. The first word was monkey, so I want for everyone following along, just see a monkey in your mind. You can do this with your eyes open or closed, doesn't matter. This monkey is dancing around. It is making monkey noises, whatever a monkey would sound like. I'm working on the monkey impression, but the point here is to really see and hear that monkey, okay? The monkey now picks up a gigantic iron, like you would iron your clothes with, because that was the next word. So just see this monkey dancing around with this giant iron. The iron starts to fall, but a rope attaches itself to the iron. Maybe even feel that rope, maybe interact with it. Maybe it feels sort of rough. Okay, so we're getting more senses involved there. Feel the rope. The rope, you look up the rope and you see the other end of the rope is attached to a kite. All right, it's flying around in the air. Maybe even reach up and try and touch that kite, okay? The kite you see now crashes into the side of a house. Really visualize it crashing into the house. The house, you notice, is completely covered in paper. For some strange reason, it's totally covered in paper. That's the next word I had given you. Out of nowhere, a shoe appears and it starts to walk all over the paper. Maybe it's messing it up as it's walking on it, that shoe. The shoe smells pretty badly, so you decide to investigate and see why. You see inside this smelly worm. There's a smelly worm crawling around, all right? This smelly worm now jumps out of the shoe and into an envelope, all right? So you see the worm goes into an envelope. Maybe it's going to mail itself or something. Maybe that's why envelope was next. Out of nowhere, a pencil appears. It starts to write all over it, all right? Really see the pencil. The pencil now jumps into a river. There's a huge splash for some reason when it hits the river. The river, you notice, is crashing up against a giant rock. Okay? The rock flies out of the river. It crashes into a tree. This tree is growing cheese. You probably haven't seen a tree like that before. This one's growing cheese. And out of each piece of cheese shoots a dollar. All right? The last word was dollar. Okay, now I'm going to go through this again, but very quickly in about 30 seconds or so. And your job now will be to simply just replay through this story in your mind. So we started off with a monkey. What was the monkey dancing around with? It was dancing around with an iron. What attached itself to the iron? It was a rope. Okay, the other end of the rope was attached to something. What was it? It was a kite. Okay, the kite crashed into the house. The house was covered in paper. Something walked on the paper. What was it? It was a shoe. What was crawling around in the shoe? It was a worm, right? The worm jumped into what? It was an envelope, okay? What was writing on the envelope? It was a pencil. All right. The pencil then jumped into what? It was a river. The river was crashing into the rock. All right. The rock flew into the tree. The tree was growing what? Cheese. And then what came out of it? It was a dollar. All right. So now it should be relatively easy for people. If they want to give this a try, they can, I'm not sure how they will be going through this interview later, maybe YouTube or something, or whatever platform they're using, they can probably just hit pause and see if they can go through the words and then resume the interview. I think if people give that a try at some point, they'll find that they're able to recall most, if not all of those random words by simply replaying through that little story in their mind. Each major object they see will give them the next word. Okay. Now, of course, this short exercise is designed in, just a short interview situation to better illustrate how these techniques work, but they don't apply to simply random words. This can be applied to anything at all, even very complex types of information. If people do later check out my website at some point, they will find this. When I did speak at Harvard, they loved it. So I ended up getting a testimonial from the Harvard Graduate Council that you'll find on my website. There were medical students, business students, law students that have to deal with very complex types of information. They found these techniques to be incredibly beneficial to them. It's about taking this simple story method concept a little bit further and learning how to turn these into mental note cards. So that monkey might represent something a little bit broader. What I mean by this is, let's say you were going to use this in terms of giving a presentation. All right. In the US, healthcare is always a big hot topic for discussion over here in the US. If you were giving some sort of presentation, speech discussing healthcare in the US, you might have your first image be a stethoscope that the doctor would use to check your heartbeat. All right. The first topic that you want to cover in your speech is the high cost of healthcare in the United States. So maybe shooting out of the stethoscope are a bunch of $100 bills. Next thing you want to cover or hit on in your presentation is that under current healthcare programs, in order to find a way to get things covered, you need to navigate through or cut through a lot of red tape. Maybe wrapping itself around the $100 bills is all of this red tape. So you see there how you might be able to outline a presentation and use simple imagery connected in a story to at least minimize the amount of notes that you would use, making you a more effective and more persuasive speaker, as opposed to someone that's just reading everything off a sheet of paper, or who has tons of slides and is just reading the slides the entire time. So I've seen even world famous professors at conferences not get the best marks from the audience because their presentation was, here's slide number 1 on my research with tons of charts, stats, and figures. Here's slide number 2 on my research, and the audience starts to fall asleep, right? If you're able to give a presentation minimizing the amount of notes, you're able to be much more engaging with your audience. You're better able to keep their attention.
Yeah, so overall, it just improves your communication skills, just being able to have those, employ, even just those simple memory tasks that you just spoke about, makes you become a better communicator overall, which helps you throughout life in general. So that's definitely something that everybody needs to work on, and me, myself. And, I'll just preface me saying that I didn't want to get quizzed by you because it is 6 a.m. here in Australia and I've not recently just woken up. So, and I didn't want to be made to look silly on my podcast. But I'm pretty sure, though, with the way that you went through that I'd probably be able to remember probably 95% of that. So thank you very much for that, Chester. Yeah. Just remind us what that what your website address is and what that code is, so people can jump on and have a look at that.
Yeah, if people want to go deep with this training, for further training, just go to memoryschool.net. Again, memoryschool.net, and the coupon code for your audience will be only. It should be valid as long as you're one of the first 20 people to use that code.
Perfect. That sounds awesome. I had a couple more questions for you, Chester, before I let you go. So obviously you're able to remember a lot of things, but are there things that you want to forget? And is that by choice? Like if something happens in your life and you really just don't want to remember it, are you able to forget it, or do you remember most things that happen in your life?
Yeah, so in terms of my memory without implementing any sort of technique, without really trying to use these types of memory skills, I'm probably just above average. I was just above average to begin with, but really just the maybe extraordinary level, just it really comes with the techniques, right? Using the techniques. So if I don't think about something for a long while, hopefully, things that I would want to forget might start to fade away, just like with anyone else. So if I don't really review it mentally, then it would tend to fade away with time. But memory is a very, very interesting topic. It's a very fascinating area, and even with all of today's the current level of brain research, it isn't fully understood. So it's a very tricky thing, especially when we're talking about personal experiences, life experiences. So sometimes, for instance, a traumatic event might might totally ingrain something into our memory. Even 30, 40 years later, we're not able to get rid of it. But if it's a bit more extreme, sometimes it can even cause a block in your memory, right? You don't remember details around that traumatic experience. So memory is very, very tricky. It isn't really fully understood. Sometimes things will just stay there, even if you don't want it to stay there.
Look, Chester, this is a conversation that I'm not actually going to forget, which is good because I do forget a lot of things, which is why I was so keen to talk to you. But before I let you go, I do have one more question for you. What would you do differently if only you knew?
Yeah, so if only I knew. So I hope, as a closing message, that your listeners, now that they know that that memory is actually something that they can work on, I hope that they will make that effort, because it is going to really, in many ways, fuel one's personal and professional development. I think that if I only knew myself, it applies to not only my memory skills, but to many things. A lot of times I just wish I would have gotten started earlier. And I think that is the case for a lot of people. So, in terms of memory, I started to work on it a little bit later in my life. I think it would have been even more beneficial if only I knew to work on it earlier. And just, right now I'm working on Russian, and I'm really amazed at what that was my New Year's resolution, actually, for
Wow.
2020. And I finished Russian level 1 now, which was the goal. And I'm able to have a lot of basic conversations. I've learned hundreds of words, thanks in part to the memory skills. But I feel like I'm amazed at what I got done, and if I would have just started earlier. So I think that's my answer. It applies to a lot of different things. I wish I would have. A lot of times, if I only knew what I could have accomplished, I would have started earlier.
100%. And, one of, I suppose, just a little bit of a key takeaway that I'm taking from this is, we train our bodies and, we encourage everybody, take the stairs, don't take the elevator. And I think it's a similar thing with your mind. Train your mind, make sure that you're thinking about things and you are visualizing things and employing those skills. So I do encourage everybody to check out Chester's website and there's so many clips on you online, so there's so much to be learned. So if you want to know anything more about Chester, feel free to follow him on all the socials. Just Google his name, and there's a lot of things that come up about him. I'll have a link to your website, Chester, on my website, ifonlyyouKnewpodcast.com.au. And if anybody has any questions, just reach out. And I'd also like to see in the comments how everybody went in that memory test. So thank you so much for joining me today, Chester. I really appreciate it.
Thank you again for having me, Christy. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Chester.